news. So you can't even look away from it right now. So we've got at the Millennial Roundtable, we've got Kerby Anderson and also Chelsey Youman, and they're going to be great guests today as we talk about everything from what happened on the Today Show with Matt Lauer to Garrison Keillor that was just breaking here from Minnesota Public Radio, caught in kind of some allegations. We'll be talking about, can we morally support Roy Moore, who's the Alabama senator, and millennials and the changing charitable landscape. So we've got quite a few topics that's going on. And so, Chelsey, I am so glad that you're here to help sort us all out.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. It's been a couple weeks, so I missed you guys.
Kerby, we would never know that she's gone because social media allows us to keep up with her. From
she
afar,
is
right?
the queen of Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
And, of course, happy anniversary, or happy birthday, I should say, first of all, to your son, and happy anniversary as well.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's a busy year between November and January. We've got all of our big birthdays and anniversaries.
And you've been celebrating even earlier, right? So you just came back from D.C., went to the Fed Sox Society?
Yes, a busy few weeks. We had the Federalist Society Convention, which is a conservative lawyers conference in D.C. this year, and it was a all-star lineup from the Trump administration. They came and spoke to us. So many breakout sessions, but a few of the high points were Justice Gorsuch actually spoke at the main event, a black tie event that night, and talked just about, the theme was majorly just scaling back and deregulating the federal government and what a limited government and administrative state, what a dream that would look like and be for conservatives. And Jeff Sessions came and spoke with us, as did White House counsel. So really was a wonderful, wonderful convention, my favorite that they've had yet.
They're just scraping the bottom of the barrel is what it sounds like. I mean, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, and big Justice Gorsuch.
Well, Nick, let's talk about where you have been to Israel. And again, you're kind of the king of Facebook, and I've seen a number of pictures from you in Israel. So what brought you there?
I know. So I was with the Denison Forum there, was just helping out Jim Denison. It was just a great little time. I was in Israel for 10 days and then switched over to Tennessee to celebrate Thanksgiving with family, and realized that quickly my preference and the popular opinion of pork changed quite a bit from Israel, where it's kind of avoided, and in Tennessee, where it's celebrated. But nevertheless, it was a great time to be there. I don't want to eat any more hummus for about 2 or 3 more days, and then I want to be back after it. But such a great time with family, and then such a great time kind of in the Holy Land, just walking the steps of Jesus.
You know, yesterday we had an individual from Tennessee, David French, and he lives south of Nashville in the mule capital of the country.
Oh, he does.
And which is kind of fun. And it is, I think, telling that we tend to quote from him so often because he lives in Tennessee. And these people from Tennessee, have you noticed, they're really full of common sense.
All good things. So when the Bible talks about the lamb flowing with milk and honey, it's actually referring to Tennessee, just so you know. We have a certain proclivity for those. So I would highly recommend. I watched from afar yesterday, and so if you were so interested in kind of the debate that French had last night, as well as what he talked about with Kerby yesterday, you can go online to pointofview.net, as well as go over to the Facebook page at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio, in order that you might be able to catch some of the snippets of that 30-minute interview. Just a phenomenal. David French is just phenomenal.
He is. He really is.
He's just so prolific.
Great resource.
And he's just a trusted conservative voice and a Christian voice, and just has such a prudence to the way that he writes. It really does make it very palatable for individuals. But there is so much going on, we said at the beginning, and the news just continues to come out. And so we woke up this morning. I send out this thing called the Daily Briefing. It's just kind of an overview of the day's news, and I sent it out. And then 3 minutes later, news broke that Matt Lauer, our beloved kind of host of the Today Show on NBC, was fired, and his contract was terminated with NBC over some sexual misconduct and sexual allegations. Again, he joins the long list of individuals from Harvey Weinstein to Jeremy Piven was a part of that. Just a number of individuals that have been a part of some of these allegations. But Matt Lauer, his job has been terminated. And we're beginning to see there was almost like a complex that was going on to it, right, Kerby?
Well, and that's one of the things that, again, I don't want to be too harsh on him because we don't know all the facts, but the facts we do know are of concern, because not only were there allegations of some kind of impropriety, but those stories had circulated for a long time. Apparently, in the New York area among people that were in the media, similar to what you have with Harvey Weinstein. And you might say, again, why didn't they come forward? Well, there are all sorts of people that said, I didn't dare because he would actually retaliate in ways that would end my career and vilify me in various ways. So in some respects, it reminds me of some of the things happened under Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, or under Harvey Weinstein and now Matt Lauer. And the fact that there were a number of different news organizations, including the New York Times, are about ready to release that. That's when the NBC decided, well, we're going to end this pretty quickly, because of the fact that there were more than just the allegations. There was the fact that a lot of people apparently knew, and that he would actually do all he could to intimidate anybody that would actually come out against him or begin to bring some truth to the discussion.
And so following with Matt Lauer, we also have another personality. He was writing for the Washington Post, New York Times, but he's best known as the former host of A Prairie Home Companion, Garrison Keillor. Just earlier today, the Minnesota Public Radio announced his termination because of misconduct. And Chelsey, it just seems as though there's just no end to it right now.
There probably won't be an end to it, to be honest. I don't expect there to be an end. If you look at just even the sexual abuse statistics alone, and that's a higher level, obviously, than sexual harassment, but pure sexual abuse is 1 in 5 women. So if you think of how far that line can really be pushed, if you pull that back and you say, okay, it's not just going to be assault we're talking about, if we broaden that spectrum and talk about workplace misconduct and other types of harassment, I doubt that there's many women who haven't been affected to some extent by some of this.
And I think Kerby brought up a really great point, and you're illuminating it to a large degree, is that it's not just one incident in the present. There's been a long history of incidents that have brought us to this particular point. And what is it about this moment right now that's causing women to be able to speak up, to be empowered by this?
Well, I, for one thing, for years I wouldn't call it a shaming culture, but there has been a lot of rape victim shaming or pointing to the women and how they dressed, or if you're talking about on-campus abuses with these athletes, especially at Baylor, came out last year.
Oh, yeah.
It's really a systemic issue, and at some point, women are going to feel like there's safety in numbers, and if they truly are victims, and there's truth behind the allegations. To be naming their perpetrators is a really powerful part of healing.
I think that's one of the more illuminating things. Especially, I was on Twitter and I was noticing what one particular woman said, that if you want to know why it's so hard for women to be able to speak up, look at the comments and the replies from tweets. That there's just this sense of shaming individuals and shaming women to either try to cause them to think that they're part of the problem because of something that they've done or something that they wear, or simply by trying to disturb the equilibrium because the equilibrium has been unjust for them and has been harmful for them. We'd love to hear from you, and you can speak up as well. You can call in. We're going to continue to talk about Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor, and a few other issues. And so that number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Just looking at the phone lines right now, there's a couple of you that want to talk about this, which is no surprise. We'll talk about Roy Moore as well, someone that's got his fair share of accusations. And so when we get back after the commercial break, we'll continue to talk about this and more. So be sure to follow up. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Should private businesses be allowed to decide what products and services they sell? The question seems absurd. Of course, they should be free to decide what products and services they sell to the general public. Tim Cook is Apple's CEO and has been in the news over the last few months, and he has received the prestigious Free Expression Award from the Museum in Washington, D.C. In accepting the award, he talked about the values of Apple and the need for corporations to have values. That is the reason they banned some apps from their Apple Store that they believed were offensive or mean-spirited. Unfortunately, as David French explains in a recent column, the corporate philosophy of Apple doesn't seem to extend to other businesses. He says you can sum up their philosophy in 8 words: free speech for me, but not for thee. Last month, Apple and a number of corporations urged the Supreme Court to rule against Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop. He and his business exercised the same rights that Apple and other businesses did in deciding not to bake a cake for a same-sex ceremony. David French explains the similarity. He says just as Apple was unwilling to use its App Store to express ideas that it found offensive, Masterpiece Cake Shop chose not to create a rainbow wedding cake to celebrate a gay wedding.
Just as Apple claims that it engages in expression, not discrimination, Masterpiece Cake Shop says it serves all comers without regard to race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. But he was not singling out homosexuals. He has served many of them with other baked goods, but he sometimes has to say no. In the past, he has refused to make custom cakes for Halloween, divorce celebrations, and bachelor parties. And as perhaps you can now see, Jack Phillips isn't discriminating on the basis of identity, but on the basis of message. Apparently, Apple does not understand that and does not see their hypocrisy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson. And we were talking about, right before the break, the news that broke earlier this morning about Matt Lauer and the sexual allegations that have kind of come against him, and NBC deciding to terminate his contract. We just heard news that Garrison Keillor, famous kind of the Washington Post, New York Times op-ed writer, wears a prairie companion called Homer. What's it called?
Prairie home companion.
Why is it slipping my mind right now?
All the men are good looking, all the women are strong, and the children are above average.
And this child is not able to get his words out of it, apparently. Has lost his job as well because of sexual conduct misallegations. And so just to give us a review, Matt Lauer's lost his job, Charlie Rose has lost his job, Mark Halperin has lost his job, Glenn Thrush from New York Times gone, Billy Bush gone, Harvey Weinstein gone, Kevin Spacey gone. The list goes on and on, Kerby, and it seems as though it's not going to end anytime soon.
You know, Ben Shapiro is another fellow millennial, and he says, well, there are people that say, well, this will finally solve the problem. I like Chelsey's comment, I don't think we'll ever find the end to this, because we won't. For now, there seems to be a desire to clean house. And for the first time, women feel free to speak out. And some men, by the way, because when you get Kevin Spacey, you're talking about men too, feel free for the first time to speak out. But given the fact that there are people in this society who are wanting to associate themselves with people that have money or power or fame, that oftentimes they'll keep quiet, even in those circumstances, because their career is on the line. So this is something that we're going to have to address, I think, continuously. But the good news is that I think the dam broke a little bit with Bill Cosby. I think it really broke with Harvey Weinstein. And then all of a sudden, when you started having even political figures, because we haven't even talked about United States senators and members of Congress and other individuals, it now became safe. And this was known, let's recognize, in Hollywood, we talked about the casting couch. In Capitol Hill, I was just in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, there's what's called a creep list that they pass around to the women, so they know there are certain individuals. I'm waiting for the creep list to get posted in the Washington Post.
I wish it would.
Yeah, because they're just certain individuals that they tell congressional staffers, just stay away from these individuals, because you don't, first of all, want to be in an elevator with them, but you really don't ever want to go into an office with them if the door is closed, and all sorts of things that you have to pay attention to.
We talked a little bit earlier before the break about one of the reasons it's just now, as you mentioned, the dam is breaking and so many women are coming forward. And we said at first, part of it is victim shaming and there's safety in numbers. But I think we would be, I'd be remiss not to say there are probably other reasons that maybe women mitigated their circumstances and mitigated the harassment or things that they underwent, because they didn't quite rise to the level of sexual assault, right? So women might say, we all know people who've been raped or anything a part of that culture, and they say, well, it doesn't rise to that level, so maybe it's really not worth talking about. And I think what we're seeing is that we have a culture crisis right now, and the first priority should be women, healing from all of this, but the second should be us as a culture and as a country taking a good look at our consciences and how the sexual revolution and some of the underlying reasons for why this behavior has become so rampant.
It just continues to be rampant, and it's just it's almost to the point where it's tragically not shocking anymore. That we're recognizing the brokenness of humanity, and that no person is immune to this brokenness. We've talked about, Kerby alluded to it, we were talking about kind of the media figures, and Matt Lauer and Garrison Keillor would be the first most on the list. But then you've also got the political world as well. You've got Al Franken, who it appears as though he's still surviving right now. Mm-hmm. He's still in the Senate. He's working on this tax reform bill. John Conyers, who's the Michigan Democrat, he's actually gone back to Michigan right now. Apparently, according to Politico, in their afternoon playbook, they said he was seated comfortably in 10D on American Airlines back to Michigan right now. So he is not on Capitol Hill. And so he continues. And then there's the allegations with Roy Moore. Mm-hmm. So Roy Moore allegations that came out because the Washington Post reporting. Kerby, I'm trying to make sense of this right now, especially from the political standpoint. These are individuals that are elected by we the people. They're individuals that are holding this office. And I guess the blunt question is, does Hollywood have a higher standard than D.C. right now?
You do wonder, don't you?
Are we
always
really
talked about all the kind of things that we knew happened in Hollywood, the high divorce rates and people running around and all the rest. But now we're starting to find out a little bit about Capitol Hill and what is happening there. And I do believe that the other reason this has surfaced, we've been talking about some of the reasons. I think there's also the part on the Democratic Party said, maybe it's about time to clean house. Because in the last election, remember a year ago, October of 2016, Access Hollywood. Remember this?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody around the table does. Man, most of the people in the listening audience remember. You hear Donald Trump say some things, you go, phew. But, of course, what's the quick response? Well, you're talking about what he said. How about what your husband did?
Yeah.
And then you covered it up. And the Democrats, I think, are just saying, in this next election, the 2018 election, we just cannot throw stones at some of our opponents if we live in a glass house. And so that's kind of another issue that maybe is why some of this is surfacing now, because these are mostly Democrats that are being outed in Capitol Hill right now and even in the media, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's mostly Democrats, but then again, it's on both sides.
Yeah, sure.
You got David Vitter that was doing this, and yet he's still in office right now, right, Chelsey?
Right. I mean, not only do we have to be intellectually honest and say, let's get history right. They're both perpetrators, for lack of a better word. We have to be ethically and morally honest. And I think when it comes to Roy Moore, I know we have an article posted for everyone to read. I actually am I really stand on a different block than the author of this article who, and we can get into it later, but I really think that we have to, if we want the system to change and we want to adhere to a set of values and principles, we got to vote some values and principles.
That's good. Oh, but before we get into that, we're going to get into that after the commercial break. I want to take one phone call before we head to the break. We've got Suzanne from California. Suzanne, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Suzanne, what is your point of view?
I'm like a survivor, I guess you would call it, of Hollywood, and just hearing people talk about it, I get it's almost like a PTSD. My heart palpitates, and you just get afraid. There's such a real palpable fear at the studios of when this happens that you can't say a word. It's the old boys club, and it's the modern casting couch, and you just know that that's the way it's going to be if you want to climb the ladder, the proverbial ladder. But the men, most of the executives, the top executives, have a button on their desk, which I have nightmares about. And you push that button and the door closes. And I remember many times, especially when I was new, I would get called to the office of someone, my boss or someone else, and you hear that door close behind you, and you just know that, you're at the mercy of whoever it is, and who are you going to tell? It's happening in human resources too. So there's no one to tell, nowhere to go, and you just if you want to work there, and a lot of people sacrifice. If you want to work on the celebrities, if you want to work in that business, you just suck it up, and that's what you do. But I want to just make sure that the girls that are in that business, in that position, know that it leaves a deep, deep scar that'll never go away. And for people that have been objected to this, you have to address it and get it out. Mine was years ago, but when all this came out, I got hysterical, like I was going to get called on it.
Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing. And my goodness, Suzanne from California, it's just despicable. Just despicable, some of the acts that have been perpetrated and continue to be perpetrated, but just the hope that can come from getting in the light of this. I'm reminded, Kerby, of the David French article. Yes. We were just talking about that. So David French brought up a really great point that you just have these individuals that Suzanne was talking about. There's just the desperation not only just to want to survive in Hollywood, but to thrive in Hollywood. And some sacrifices of character that have to be made to do that. But then how these Hollywood executives continue to see that desperation and prey upon that. It's just despicable behavior, Kerby.
It is. Well, and again, we have to recognize that we're talking about sinful individuals, that we need to hold them accountable. And maybe when we come back from the break, I've been talking about how I'm seeing these non-apology apologies, and then even some of the virtue shaming and some of that that has come out there where we don't hold people accountable. But number two, how about coming back to some biblical rules here? The sexual revolution threw all of those out. And so when you talk about chastity and fidelity and honesty and chivalry, those are like words from the 19th century. Maybe we need to come back to some of those rules. What do you think?
And so when we come back, I'm going to put on a night suit, and I'm going to try to be chivalrous, and we're going to figure out can we morally support some of these candidates specifically in office. And so let's just call it spade for a spade. Can you morally and biblically justify supporting Roy Moore for Alabama Senate? And we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. You can go online, pointofview.net, and check out the article that we'll kind of be pivoting from, and we'll talk about that right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, joined at the Millennial Roundtable today with Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman. And so we have been talking about just kind of some of the scandal and also just some of the breaking news that's been coming out relative to Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor, and the list just continues to go on. And we're tragically not surprised by anyone, just recognizing the brokenness of humanity and that sin knows no bounds and it knows no political party as well, which naturally brings us up to the next article and conversation that we'll be talking about. You can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, to be able to access this article that we'll be talking about. It was out of the Federalist, Ben Dominich's site. It says, can we morally support Roy Moore? And so if you were alive and not under a rock in 2016, many of these arguments will sound very similar with the biblical comparisons. Is there a moral justification to be able to vote for a candidate that's compromisable simply because of some of their sinful actions, when you recognize that there are certain issues from the other party that are just as detrimental, they would say, but not necessarily personal? And so, Chelsey, we've got just this fast. I'm going to go to you first.
Go straight to me.
I'm just going straight to you. Do I even need to ask a question, or do I just say go?
Okay, I'll tell you my favorite line from the article, and it is when he called his own article a slippery slope, and that's because that's what it was. The entire time I read it, he had a slippery slope argument, which means there's no limit. Essentially, his argument was, well, they're not religious leaders, which we can all acknowledge. They're not meant to be, all religious hope for our country should not rely on their back. And he also just said that when you look at their opponents, essentially it's more important to win, which was an argument we've all heard, and we all debated this for a very long time during the Trump campaign, especially when the allegations against him came out. But the truth is, if someone is truly morally reprehensible, and what this article completely failed to address is the actual complicity that you would have as a voter for putting someone in power who has no character. And if there are ramifications morally from their behavior and power, then you are complicit in putting them into power.
You know, the Federalist article, that one that we're talking about, she, interestingly enough, being a woman, kind of surprised me, because I figured it was going to be, don't vote for these individuals because individuals of character are not going to do well in office. But then gives us quotes from or stories about John F. Kennedy. And of course, you know all about that, as having done your doctoral dissertation on that, or Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And this is, I think, where maybe on any election you have to recognize there are probably three issues you have to look at. And the first one we're talking about is character. The other is, of course, how that individual is going to vote. And then, especially if they're going to be like a governor or president, who they're going to put in office, because oftentimes who they put in office can actually undercut their particular mission. In the best of all worlds, I would want 3 out of 3. Sometimes you only get 2 out of 3. Sometimes you only get 1 out of 3. But there is a point at which you simply say, on issues, on character, on the kind of people they have around us, that's enough for me to go to the other side. And so the first point I want to do is relate to the person that's the purist out there. The purist out there says it's got to be 3 out of 3 or forget it. And so that means that I have to agree with that individual on every political stand that he or she takes. Well, you know, when I voted, there's only been twice where I voted for an individual I completely agreed with, and those are the 2 times I voted for myself as precinct chairman, okay? Everybody else I'm voting for, at least on some issue, I probably disagree. On some issues, I disagree a great deal. But if, again, you feel that at that point, on those issues, you disagree with that person enough, and you feel like it would be sin for you, interestingly enough, we do have some principles in the scriptures about that, because the Apostle Paul, in the book of Romans in particular, spend some time talking about individuals that would feel that it would be sinful for them to eat meat sacrificed to idols. And so if you feel that it would be sinful for you to vote for an individual on the basis of their stand on issues or on the basis of their character, then you're not supposed to vote for them. And so people in Alabama right now might say, well, I just cannot bring myself to vote for Roy Moore, so I'll vote for either the opponent, Doug Jones, or now we have a third-party candidate who's Lee Busby, or I simply won't vote. But on the other hand, if you say, I don't feel it would be sinful, but I don't exactly like this individual, then I think you have the freedom. So this is a place where I think Christians might disagree, simply because on some of those issues, a particular stand on an issue, a particular character flaw is a deal breaker. In other cases, it might not be. And so I thought it was kind of interesting because the one you posted here, first of all, I was striking by it's a woman. I figured she would be very much against this individual, Roy Moore, just on the basis of character. But she at least has been able to give an argument for how you could be morally justified to vote for a person who's morally questionable.
And I walked away from that article just thinking to myself, dear God, there are 320 million people in the U.S. There are upwards of about 4.8 million people in Alabama. Is there not a better person?
Can we find somebody better?
Can we not find somebody that doesn't have accusations of this child relationships with a child?
Right. And that's why a lot of people want to vote for Lee Busby, because, retired Marine colonel and an individual that on the issues and on character probably looked like a pretty good individual. But or even they would have voted for Luther Strange if this had come out before. But
right. If your choice is between prison or being a politician, I really think that's not a good place to be, Alabama.
And one of the things I am so frustrated by, and again, I can understand, I won't go there. I can understand supporting Roy Moore. I can understand that. If you have certain issues I think you brought up a really great point. You can either be with their positions, you can be with their character, or the purview of their power. You might support some of Roy Moore's positions to the extent that it doesn't matter what his character is, it doesn't matter what the purview is, you can support him. That's great.
But you're going to pay a price for it. That's what you're going to pay a price for it.
Just at least, for me, at least be intellectually honest. Yes. What kills me about these Federalist articles and about what happened in 2016 is to be intellectually dishonest with individuals to try to force something onto them that they're not trying to. Don't say he's King Cyrus. Don't rationalize David's behavior because he killed a man and raped Bathsheba. Don't try to rationalize their sinful
please
behavior.
Don't use Joseph and Mary.
And don't use Joseph.
Was that the worst of all?
Don't be dishonest intellectually about this. I just support them and say why you're supporting them, but don't try to force the scripture onto these people.
And we were willing to impeach, let us not forget, a president of the United States over less. So, less. It's all discretion. Yeah. It's all an issue. But you're so right to say that. Yes, there's a pragmatic take to this, which we did have when we had a binary choice, and Hillary Clinton and President Trump, and the future of our Supreme Court was on the line. Really, the stake of the entire country was on the line. That's a different context in some ways to be considered. The ramifications of that election were going to be very, very broad, and that's a little bit different than what we have in Alabama, where I think there's more leeway to say, look, if you would want to impeach a Democrat over this and not allow them to continue to hold elected office, and that didn't even involve a minor, really, where's your conscience on this issue?
Yeah, I think, again, Kerby and then yourself, you bring up, I think there's 4 options that they have, that the Alabama vote
list is growing.
So in my mind, as best I can think of, there's 4 options, or at least 4 options. You can vote for Roy Moore. You can vote for Doug Jones. You can vote for Busby.
Lee Busby.
Or you can just not vote at all.
Just not vote. Go fishing.
So here's my understanding, as best I can make it. The last thing I want you to do is to disengage from the political process, because I think when you disengage from the political process, you lay your hands off. And I'm reminded of what Edmund Burke said: the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to be silent. I think you can. I would highly commend you upon the scriptures, from everything from Romans 13 to 1 Peter 2 to Jeremiah 29, to engage in the process and to vote. And if that vote is for the third party candidate, or if that vote is for one of the other candidates, recognize that anything that you do in faith is not a wasted vote. It's not a wasted vote if you're doing it in faith, because we recognize the truth from 1 Corinthians 15:58 that nothing is in vain if it's done in faith. But I would highly say, I would think that you continue to embolden and allow and enable this type of behavior to be perpetuated into the future if you support candidates such as this with these type of character issues. It's just confounding.
You know, after we come back from the break, I'd like to have maybe the two of you speak to this issue of how millennials will look at this, because we already know that your generation at the moment isn't registered to vote and isn't voting and is very skeptical about political processes. And whether it's Roy Moore or Al Franken or a half a dozen others that we could mention, does that affect people not like you? You two are very politically involved, but how does that affect maybe your generation as to whether or not they go, psh, you know, I just told you, just a bunch of crooks. You know, we've heard that for generations, and a bunch of hypocrites, and it doesn't do any good to vote. Is this going to, because of this cynicism, maybe even require even fewer people to go to the polls and vote?
And
I wonder.
Yeah, and you can call in as well. So we're going to take one of those breaks, and be sure to call in. We'd love to hear from you. I'm sorry if you get a busy signal, because there's quite a few people that have an opinion on this. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. That number's 800-351-1212. Or you can go on Facebook and post a comment. We'll be sure to get to it at facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night, and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the student's message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable today by Chelsey Youman and Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about can we be morally justified to vote for broken, sinful people, and kind of with the allusions to Roy Moore and what's happening in Alabama. And there have been a couple of people that have called in, so we figured that we'll start taking some phone calls right now, and so I'm looking through the list. We'll go ahead. We've got Lou from Texas right now. Lou, are you there? Lou, you there? Lou from Texas?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. What is your point of view?
My point of view is President Trump, who has had a lot of bad things said about him and things that we know are true. And I get a lot of flack from people if I support him. And my thing is, in the Bible, I can remember a king being put in charge, and he was an evil person, but God used him for his purpose. And aren't we supposed to believe that God is in control and nothing happens without his permission? And I feel that Trump is in there, President Trump is in there because good is going to come from it.
Yes, ma'am. I think you have highlighted a very comforting point for me, especially just knowing the sovereignty of God. I'm reminded of just the power of God. It says in Psalm 115:3 that the Lord sits in the heavens and does as he pleases. And so not only sitting in the heavens, so it's kind of a big view, but then you think about Proverbs 16:33. It says that the lot is cast and every decision comes from the Lord. So everything as big as the universe, but as small as a die cast, the Lord is in control of this. To even see that beautiful point in Genesis 50:20 where it says that even what man intended for evil, God can use for good. And we see the sovereignty of God on display. But I just wonder about human capacity and human agency in the midst of that as well. The opportunity for individuals to exercise that and the agency that God has given us, that freedom to be able to do everything that we can to, as my former boss, Jim Dennison, would say, to live a life that God could bless and not necessarily try to put ourselves up against and pray for God's mercy. Yes, we should do that, but also to recognize the opportunity for us to live in a life of abundance and live a life of character and upstanding, because we recognize the truth too from Proverbs 21:1 that in the king's heart is in the Lord's hand is the king's heart, and it's like a stream of water that he moves it to and fro. So we recognize the truth that God's always in control, but his in control doesn't mean that we don't have a little bit of capacity as well to be able to make decisions that ultimately demonstrate our character and also our upstanding Christian values. Am I wrong on some of that?
That's very good.
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah. So thank you.
Call.
Thank you so much, Lou. We've got Kate calling in right now. Kate, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Kate.
I was telling the man that as a Christian and I go to vote, one of the things I would have problem with is that neither candidate, if I was to stand on my Christian principles, I could not vote for either one of these candidates. I don't know enough about the third party one, and I'm not from Alabama, so I'm grateful that I'm not. The problem I see is that I cannot stand up for a man, and I know you can't be a Democrat if you're not pro-abortion. You can't be on their ticket. So therefore, I could not vote for the man who still thinks it's okay to take the life of children. If I had to make a choice between the two, I would have to take the one that had a past, but it's not present now, than the one that now is promoting something that takes the life, because the damage is done to these women is just as bad a damage as it is to women who are raped. One or the other isn't better. They are both equally bad. So he's still standing on this. He's standing on it. So I couldn't vote for him.
Yeah, Kate, you bring up a really great point, and probably a stinging indictment against Doug Jones. Doug Jones is the Democratic candidate out of Alabama, and he's not just a Democrat that's pro-choice, but he's been championing abortion up until birth from everything that I've read. And so you're not alone, Kate, in kind of that sentiment that you share.
You know, one of the things that some of our listeners that especially are in the blue states struggle with is you've heard the phrase that I shouldn't pick the lesser of two evils. Now, that phrase I think is overused sometimes, but if you really do believe that both candidates are evil, I think you already have answered your question, and that is you're not supposed to pick the lesser of two evils. But again, as like I said, sometimes I hear people saying that because, well, this one candidate agrees with me 60% of the time, the other candidate agrees with me 20% of the time. Well, if 60% and this person is not an evil person, I think you vote for them. But in the case of what Kate was talking about is if you really do believe that both candidates are evil, I think you already have your answer, don't you?
Yeah, I think what you're looking for, especially from a Christian, is sanctification, is progress, not repeating the same mistakes that you've been repeating.
Sure, and if somebody made a mistake years ago and are willing to forgive, the American people, the voters are forgiving people. And a couple of weeks ago, I even said, if some of this is true, Roy Moore, get out in front of it, apologize, say this is a lesson I learned, it has never happened again. Then we had one that came out in 1991, and we said, well, okay, now that made us still kind of wonder whether that was the case. But is it possible that somebody has something in their background a long time ago that is disqualifying? Well, it could be, but in many cases, we're a pretty forgiving people, if indeed somebody's willing to be honest with us. And that's the concern I think people are starting to have with Roy Moore. Just too much evidence, and you're not being honest with us.
Yeah.
So where does that lead us?
Well, that leads us to California. And Tony in California, I think, is going to voice some similar sentiments. Tony, are you there?
Yes, I am here. And for the past 10 years, I have been a most excellent, forgive me for saying that, teacher of the Word in one of the churches that I worked in. And I taught deacons, sorry, that was a bad, and elders, okay? And the Lord used me powerfully. In the 1960s, I smoked pot, and I drank, and I cursed, and I had a lot of free sex. That was in the 1960s. Sanctification is a process, and I am not the same person, totally transformed in Jesus Christ and the Word, that I was in the 1960s.
Praise God.
So you can't judge. People are not the same now that they were last year, precept upon precept. We learn, we change. Sanctification transforms us. Let's talk about who we are today in Christ, not last year.
Yeah, Tony.
I feel very adamant about that. I don't care what I've done wrong. Jesus Christ forgave me, and he's teaching me and sanctifying me little by little.
Yeah, Tony, you bring up a great point. You're a trophy of God's grace, so thank you so much for sharing your kind of a partial part of your testimony. I think, Chelsey, that brings up a really great point in the sense that we don't want to dwell on the past, but when individuals can't repent of the past, I think that does reveal their character. And so we have individuals, so we'll bring up Roy Moore, for example. Thus far, I have seen no conclusive evidence that discounts some of the allegations that come up against him. And he has been an individual that has continued to discount those, and he is not, if he can't kind of refute them, then it seems to me that if they're correct, then he needs to repent of that behavior because it seems to be wrong. But what we've seen from Roy Moore is he's running away from them, or he's just trying to profit off of them by sending out fundraising emails about it.
That's right. I mean, I would never ever suppose the state of a man's heart. I have no idea the state of his heart. I just have his record, and I just have the allegations that have come out against him, which I think are, these aren't just some general sexual harassment allegations. We're talking about minors. We're talking about pedophilia. So really keeping that in perspective, that if we don't know what the state of his heart is, and we have conclusive evidence that it in the past has not been a track record of character, I don't envy the position the voters in Alabama are in.
That's so true. And then just to kind of end on Tony before we go to break, it's a reminder what C.S. Lewis says. Don't judge a man by where he is, but judge him by how far he's come. And so we would love to hear from you as we continue to talk about this. We'll have the voter line or caller line open, rather, 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to Facebook and leave a little comment there, and we'll be sure to try to get to that as well. Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. We'll be back right after this.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome to Point of View on this November 29, 2017 day. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the Millennial Roundtable, and I'm joined at the roundtable by Kerby Anderson.
You
and
can make
Chelsey,
the phones ring today, can't
Youman,
you?
and I can make the phones ring. So if you did not listen during the first hour, we talked about a couple of things. We talked about pretty much everybody just wants to call in and ask questions about my trip to Israel. Yeah, right.
Not really.
Yeah, right. So we've been talking about kind of just the breaking news that came out earlier this morning about Matt Lauer at the Today Show and the sexual allegations that came against him. NBC terminated his contract and have cut him off from Today Show. And even reports are that they're scrambling for this Christmas tree light up tonight or tomorrow, and really trying to figure out how they edit him out of that.
Out of the Christmas tree lighting.
And then just even earlier, we've got Garrison Keillor of Minnesota Public Radio that has, again, sexual allegations have come out against him. And then there's the looming Roy Moore, who's the senatorial candidate out of Alabama. We've been talking about him. You can go online. The article that we've been kind of pivoting from is this article that was on the Federalist that said, can we morally support Roy Moore? And the lady that wrote the article was saying in the affirmative, yes, we can support. And we've taken a few phone calls because of that. And so we're going to continue taking phone calls. So if you want to call in, that number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And since it's the Millennial Roundtable, I'm going to just continue to start plugging our Facebook as well. So
Please
you can go to facebook.com/Point of View Radio. You can look us up. Unfortunately, you'll probably see my face, and I apologize for that. I have a face for radio, but nevertheless, you can watch us on there as well. So we live cast this as well as keep it for archive it as well. So we're going to continue going to the phone calls. We've got Bob here. Bob, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Yeah, we're doing well. What's your point of view?
Good. My simple thought on the Roy Moore situation is unless Jones recants permanently his stance on abortion, the choice is clear for any Christian because Roy, being a Christian, is either repented or repenting. So, I mean, one is just X'd out.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Bob, because there's a lot of Christians that have traditionally been known as single issue voters that really that abortion, because I mean it really is at the very heart of the Christian message that Jesus gave his life in order that we might have life to the fullest. That in the very heart of our founders, that they have given us liberty. We've been endowed by our Creator with liberty, right, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right. And so then you've got this, and Bob, you bring up a great point. You've either repented or repenting. But I just struggle, Kerby, because then I go and I see some of the things that Roy Moore said, and I wonder if he fits into one of those two categories.
Let me take the first point about being pro-life isn't necessarily a qualification for office, but being pro-choice is a disqualification for office. So I first of all want to agree that the issue of Doug Jones or anybody that is pro-abortion, as Jim Dobson has said on this program before, he could never bring himself to vote for a pro-abortion candidate, no matter how good they were on economic policies, no matter what kind of character they have, no matter what kind of marriage they have. So certainly I would recognize that being pro-abortion or pro-choice would be a disqualification for office for a Christian. Now, let's get to the other issue. As I said before, if Roy Moore is guilty of some of this,
probably is, if for no other reason, we have independent verification of this. You know, when he came on to Sean Hannity and said, well, I've never met that person, you're going, well, wait a minute, we have the mother saying you did. When you said, well, I never really did that, and then you have the Gadsden Mall say that they banned Roy Moore from picking up girls at the mall. Somewhere along the line, you have to move beyond, okay, maybe God forgave him. Maybe he even asked for forgiveness for those women. Not that I see that he's done that, but even leave that in the past. The point is, present-day comments don't seem to me to be honest either. And so for a lot of people, Nick, that was the deal breaker. I remember when this broke, weeks and weeks ago. It seems like years ago, but weeks ago. And, Dr. Merrill Matthews was sitting where I'm sitting right now. He said, well, we haven't heard much other than these few women. Well, then we heard more women, and then we heard more recently, because he was even making the case at the time, well, usually if somebody's a predator, it happens over time. It isn't just a one-time deal. Well, we began to hear more and more and more and more, and after a point of time, I think you run out of, well, all of these people are exaggerating or lying. And so that's the problem, where then he's not honest with the American people, and in particular the voters in Alabama. And that's why I think many people have felt like that's become a disqualification as well.
I think that's one of the things that's so illuminating, Chelsey. I mean, again, the Washington Post did this report. In the initial report, they found 4 women that were willing to go on the record. You've got 30 people on total that were willing to substantiate their claims. It just seems like the burden of evidence is now on Roy Moore. But instead of acknowledging it or saying that it's not true and providing evidence to show it's not true, he's decided to run away from it and fundraise off of it, saying it's the crooked media, mainstream media.
Right. I mean, I can live in a dream world over here, but we're not talking about maybe the broader implications for the Republican Party that this is going to have. And I think we are already a party in an identity crisis. If last year's election and however many candidates at the primary we had running isn't an indication, I think you have your head in the sand. But we're having an identity crisis as a party. We're supposed to be the party of principle, the party of ethics, both socially and economically. And I think that we have to define who we are, and it is on the Republican Party to intervene in this situation and say we don't want to lose the seat. Who else can we put up against him? Maybe if he is elected, can the governor step in and impeach him and then have a new election or replacement call at that time? But the truth is, I think that the Republican Party sometimes is silent on female issues, not because they're anti-woman, but because they view women pretty equally with everyone else. And the truth is, women are 51% of our population. That's not a faction. That's not a constituency. That's a majority of the population. And we are naive to ignore that the women need to be protected, and spoken to and addressed head on. And we're missing an opportunity and missing the boat if we fail to do that in this time.
I completely agree. I think there's just I just wonder if we turn a blind eye to these accusations and he gets elected to office. And according to the latest polls, he's up by 4 points. That's outside the margin of error right now. And I mean, he's gone through the worst, and he's only dropped 6 points according to some polls. He's gone through the worst and still up 4 points outside the margin of error. If all these accusations have been leveled against him, not provided any substantive evidence to counteract those allegations, what are we enabling?
Yes.
If we put him into office, what are we enable? Where does it end then? Right? We thought there was the lesser of two evils, is the thing we said in 2016. Is this a pattern that continues to be perpetuated into the future? And I'm not a soothsayer, and I don't want to be a fortune teller, because then I'll just have nightmares for the rest of because if this is where we're headed, this is just, I would just be very fascinated to see what that future
Well, the Republican Party in Alabama needs to get organized right now. They need to come up with a plan. It needs to be unified front, and they can overcome this. We have an independent candidate on the books. I mean, there just needs to be a plan of action in Alabama.
And even Senator Shelby said that he did not vote for Roy Moore. And so I think that speaks volumes about it. But we would love to hear from you as well. So I don't want to dominate the conversation. You can call in at 800-351-1212, or you can log on to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and register a comment, and we'll get to it. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Should private businesses be allowed to decide what products and services they sell? The question seems absurd. Of course, they should be free to decide what products and services they sell to the general public. Tim Cook is Apple's CEO and has been in the news over the last few months, and he has received the prestigious Free Expression Award from the Museum in Washington, D.C. In accepting the award, he talked about the values of Apple and the need for corporations to have values. That is the reason they banned some apps from their Apple Store that they believed were offensive or mean-spirited. Unfortunately, as David French explains in a recent column, the corporate philosophy of Apple doesn't seem to extend to other businesses. He says you can sum up their philosophy in 8 words: free speech for me, but not for thee. Last month, Apple and a number of corporations urged the Supreme Court to rule against Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cake Shop. He and his business exercised the same rights that Apple and other businesses did in deciding not to bake a cake for a same-sex ceremony. David French explains the similarity. He says just as Apple was unwilling to use its App Store to express ideas that it found offensive, Masterpiece Cake Shop chose not to create a rainbow wedding cake to celebrate a gay wedding. Just as Apple claims that it engages in expression, not discrimination, Masterpiece Cake Shop says it serves all comers without regard to race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. But he was not singling out homosexuals. He has served many of them with other baked goods, but he sometimes has to say no. In the past, he has refused to make custom cakes for Halloween, divorce celebrations, and bachelor parties. And as perhaps you can now see, Jack Phillips isn't discriminating on the basis of identity, but on the basis of message. Apparently, Apple does not understand that and does not see the hypocrisy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View Radio. I am Nick Pitts. That did not realize that we were on air just for that little blip. You got a little preview of what we talk about during the break. And so I'm joined by Chelsey Youman as well as Kerby Anderson. And so we are so excited that you decided to join us. And we have been talking about all things Roy Moore and the Alabama Senate seat, just kind of in the vein of what's happened with Matt Lauer earlier this morning and Garrison Keillor. And we have been taking your phone calls, and we're going to continue taking those phone calls as well as responding to your Facebook comments. So if you want to go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, as well as call in to the show at 800-351-1212. We're going to continue taking your phone calls. And so we're going to run on over. We'll go to Jacob in Georgia right now. Jacob, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Jacob, what's your point of view?
My point of view is I've always believed that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And allegations and 2 or 3 witnesses does not mean that Roy Moore is guilty. But as a voter and a minister, from what I am hearing, I think I have a very attentive ear. From what I'm hearing from you all is that the jury has gone out and he came back in with a guilty plea. Okay? And you all are asking Roy Moore to come forth and make a statement or come forth and admit guilt on allegations. And I don't think that's the way it should be. And by you, it seems as though you are more against him on allegations. And by bringing in the insinuations and things that are being said today, it seems as though the rights and the protection of women's rights is superior to the 3,000 innocent babies murdered in all fashions and forms in America. And if I were a voter out here and undecided which way to go, to me, you all are saying that Roy Moore is totally disqualified, even though he has not been proven guilty of these allegations. And therefore, vote for the murderer, the guy who supports murdering innocent babies. That is what I'm hearing, and I hope the other hearers in Alabama is not hearing the same thing.
Yeah, Jacob. Let me clarify a little bit. I am in no form or fashion supporting or the Doug Jones or Roy Moore, for that matter, or any third-party candidate. From a legal standpoint, that would be a no-no. But I would just put the question back to you: do you think it's improper for us to ask questions of Moore and the allegations that have been raised against him?
Sure. It's not improper to ask questions, but in your asking questions, don't add insinuation that these allegations could be true or factual.
So
just because a woman who said that Roy Moore tried to pick her up or whatever, he didn't have sex or do anything, but tried to pick her up, and her mother came on and said amen to this. I don't think that's grounds to really disqualify this man as being a representative of ours in Congress.
So just for clarification purposes, so when 3 girls and 2 women level accusations against him, he refuses to refute or provide evidence to the contrary, we should just move on?
No, I heard him refute those. I heard him say he wasn't guilty of them.
Okay.
And just because I've been in the world, and I've been one of the worst persons out there in the world. I was just like Paul. Mm-hmm. I was chief of sinners, and God forgave me. Mm. But I don't think that we are doing Judge Roy Moore and doing him justice by siding with the people who made these allegations, when if you look at the works that he have done in order to protect the freedoms of the American people, to protect the slaughtering of babies, and I mean, and I know that these allegations, some of them could be true, could be, but I cannot say that they are factual. And I cannot support anything that would say they're factual until they are proven.
Right. So I would just say to that, first and foremost, I just want to make abundantly clear that I would never advocate anyone vote for a Democrat. And you mentioned earlier, my choice is between someone who is, pro-choice or pro-life. And in my mind, there is in no way would I ever say to vote for someone who's pro-choice. This isn't a binary choice. Busby is an independent who is running and is another viable option. But I think my broader point is that Roy Moore is not on trial. So he's not in a criminal court of law. There's no standard of proof that we're dealing with right now. There's no level of evidence that we need to be examining. We're not jurors. He's in the public arena. He's in a political arena, and his reputation precedes him and is affected by scandal. And we have to ask ourselves, as part of the Republican Party, if even the appearance of evil is enough to really hurt and harm our cause and to hurt and harm our identity.
Yeah, I think, and again, I would think that even the founder, let's go back to what George Washington said, right? George Washington said that religion and morality would be the pillars upon which this democracy would stand. And so it's increasingly important not only for us to be cognizant and to be aware, to be an educated populace, to vote for these individuals, not only on their positions, but also on their character as well. for us to be cognizant of that. And because we live in a beautiful country that gives us the opportunity to be able to freely speak and freely assemble, we should be able to speak in such a way that we can better know their positions, as well as better know the accusations that have been leveled against them based upon previous actions as well. We're going to continue taking phone calls, and so we'll go. How about we run on over to North Carolina? How about it? We'll go to North Carolina. Ty, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Ty. What's your point of view?
It's very simple. I don't know Roy Moore personally, but I've actually attended Value Voters banquets here where he was the speaker. I have met the man. I've shaken his hand. I've never run for political office myself, but I did get involved in the Tea Party movement in 2009, and there was a local state house race because the Democrats controlled the state house and the governor's office here as far as a combination since 1898. 2010, that changed. The Republicans controlled both the state house and state senate, and we had the governorship 2 years later with Pat McCrory for 4 years. And even though we lost the governorship now, we still have veto-proof majorities in the state house and state senate. Republicans do. And I can tell you that's a huge change here. I've been involved with the Republican Party, but I can tell you it's kind of an exaggeration, but not that much. I remember going to a county Republican Party meeting here, and it was basically being held in a phone booth, or at least it could have been, as far as the number of folks that were showing up. But I'm very familiar prior to this incident with Judge Roy Moore's record. I'm a person of faith. I believe him to be a person of faith and one that's guided and driven by his principles. When I mentioned earlier there was a local race here that we got involved in in a very big way, volunteering and door knocking and putting out signs and even donating money to a campaign from our own pockets. But there were allegations made by his opponent that we had exceeded limits in terms of how much we could donate, and that was run in the local paper, reported to the state board of elections, who came down and did investigation on things. And I can tell you, as an average citizen not involved in politics, and all of a sudden you are, and now you're getting a call from a state agency that has the ability to jail you, it got my attention, to say the least. But the point of my bringing that up is all those allegations were absolutely baseless. I mean, they were literally made out of whole cloth and out of thin air. And my concern is somewhat similar to the previous caller. I think the Republican Party, just about every elected Republican of any kind of leadership position up to this point, has said, if these allegations are true, they've caveated this entire situation as, if these allegations are true, then yes, he should not be running, he should step down, he shouldn't be seated, he should be impeached if he is, and replaced by the governor, or another special election after this. But at this point, these allegations have not been proven true. And I know you were saying about this, he offered evidence to the contrary. He has come out publicly.
We've got to go. We'll be right back, Ty, and we'll come back to your call right after this break.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman. We've been talking about Roy Moore and is it morally justifiable to vote for him based upon some of the accusations. And unfortunately, we had to cut Ty off because we had to take one of those commercial breaks. But Ty, as far as I understand, you're still on the line?
I am.
Yeah. So
I just want to try to just condense things here. The bottom line is very easy to make allegations, and my concern is if we allow ourselves to be in a position where an allegation can, essentially win or lose an election because we're not going to allow somebody to run or they're not fit, I think you're going to find a smaller and smaller pool of good people who are willing to run and risk their reputation and forever be known as whatever because of an accusation that was made. And I'll make two last quick points. I'll point you to some of these hate crime hoaxes that have been proven to be hoaxes because the people who initially reported them actually ended up admitting to law enforcement that they did them to themselves, for attention and whatnot. But in the meantime, there's like the most recent one was at the Air Force Academy. They had a huge dressing down by one of the senior generals, officers, and it turned out the whole thing was a hoax. But again, there was severe action taken there because of this event that was essentially an allegation, if you will, that there was some type of racist undertone and activities going there. That if there are, they certainly weren't proved by that because that was completely fake. And then I look at the Trump dossier. The fact we even call it a dossier, trying to give it some level of credibility it does not warrant. I mean, that thing has been absolutely proven that it's unsubstantiated nonsense that came out of, some opposition research firm put together. But again, it's all over the place. You say a lie enough times that, it has an effect or sticks.
Yeah.
And honestly, at this point, Roy Moore has denied that these allegations are true. I don't know that he has to do it every time he makes a public appearance, but I think at this point to talk about, or even to ask the man questions about whether or not he should be, if he's elected, should be impeached from the Senate or removed or forced to resign or what. I think those are all, again, ridiculous questions that are extensions that do assume that these allegations that he's denied are true. Yeah. So I just have a tough time. I just have a tough time with that being a disqualifier. And I say that having a daughter, having a granddaughter, having had a mother, and having 7 sisters. So I have nothing against women. I love women.
Yeah.
I think they do deserve to be protected and respected. But again, I have a tough time with allegations bringing a man down with the history that he has of doing things that I'm in support of. I have a tough time believing that just based on allegations.
Yeah, Ty, I join you in a love for women, and so, but nevertheless, I do want to bring up your 2 examples I thought were pretty illuminating. And you're correct in that allegations in and of themselves aren't necessarily enough. And so, and then over a period of time, we start to see the truth and the veracity of those allegations. You brought up the military academy piece where there was the racist language that was actually put on by an African-American, and that came to light after a particular time. You brought up the piece about the dossier and how it ended up being just phony baloney, and it came to light after a period of time. Now, Kerby, we've had for 1 month now, we've had these allegations that aren't just allegations, but are substantiated allegations from 8 women and 30 other supporters of that. And after a month, what we continue to see is they haven't gone away, but more, we're just continuing to see them substantiated and edified more.
And again, the question that we had on the table is it justified to vote for a morally questionable politician? That's the article. And again, people in Alabama can make their decisions. Are there false allegations? I've written all sorts of commentaries over the years about these false hate crimes. We can talk about false allegations of rape. How about the Duke lacrosse case? Probably the best known one that has been an embarrassment to major mainstream media. So we recognize that sometimes people do lie. The more substantiation you get, the more witnesses you get, the less likely. But again, we're not accusing an individual in a court of law any more than Bill Clinton, except for the fact that they had a deposition about Monica Lewinsky. Everything else about Juanita Broderick, Kathleen Willey, people had to make choices about whether or not they were going to elect him, or even about whether or not they would elect Hillary Clinton based upon some of those in the past. The voters in Alabama are going to have to make decisions as well as to whether these allegations are a deal breaker. But we're not saying that just because you have questions about Roy Moore, that means you go and vote for the Democrat, which would be Doug Jones. Some people might vote for Lee Busby. Some people just say, I might not vote. Or they may vote for Roy Moore and just simply say, I'm hoping that if indeed he gets in the Senate, something gets taken care of there and we get another opportunity for a choice. But those are the choices that people in Alabama have. And fortunately, most of our listeners aren't in Alabama, so they don't have to make that agonizing choice right now.
No, they don't. So we'll continue taking some of your phone calls because in a shocking twist, there are quite a few of them.
We really shook the hornet's nest on this one today.
So it is National Square Dancing Day, so I guess we're tangoing a little bit right now. So we've got James right now. James, you're on Point of View.
Well, maybe the squares are all dancing. My point of view is this. According to scriptures, we're all sinners.
Mm-hmm.
And according to scriptures, the Lord said those without sin cast the first stone. If I understand right, this man has already been elected into the Senate. They're trying to get him out. Am I right?
Incorrect. He has been virtually, he won the primary, Kenneth Luther Strange, but now we're waiting to see whether or not he will be elected. But let's talk about somebody that has been elected to the Senate, and that is Al Franken.
Yeah.
What about that? Those are allegations. Should he step down? And that's a good question, because if on the one hand you say, I think Al Franken, who's a United States Senator, should step down because of those allegations, then maybe that gives you some perspective on how to respond to maybe Judge Roy Moore.
Well, it seems to me like that we need to be a little bit more discretionary about, first of all, who we start criticizing, guilty or not. We're all guilty of some sort of sin.
Yes, sir.
These men are guilty of sin. We'll just say, well, maybe he get convicted of this. Two of us have not made certain errors in judgment, or whatever you want to call it sin. We've been forgiven,
mm-hmm.
and we need to realize that as Christians we ought to be willing to consider the possibility of forgiving. It's our command. That's all I have to say.
James, thanks so much for that. And I completely agree with you that we're all fallen sinners. I think the biblical narrative is very clear on that. From Romans 3:23 to Isaiah 59, to Psalm 14, I think you continue to see a clear kind of line through Scripture that indicates that we're broken individuals. But I also want to be hesitant to say that we're not supposed to judge people, because at the end of the day, Miley Cyrus might not want us to judge, but God does call us to judge, right? To judge according to the standard by which you judge others. And so I am more than willing to be judged based upon the standard that I am putting forward towards Roy Moore. So if I am committing any of these type of allegations, I welcome the faithful wounds of a friend, right, Chelsey?
I think that's a good point, Nick, is to remember that whatever standards, here's just a good rule of thumb that I live by, whatever standards I hold the left to morally,
mm-hmm.
I more than hold the right to morally. Mm-hmm. So if I'm willing to say, let's impeach Bill Clinton over the issues from the 90s, which were proven incredible at the time, or I really came out against Hillary Clinton just not only because of all the fraud and the issues coming with that, but just, allegations over her lifetime that she's not a moral person. She doesn't have good character or judgment. Well, you better believe that when the allegations against Trump came out, that was very devastating to me as a Republican to hear. But I had to say, I'm going to be honest about this to myself and to others and say, we can't just ignore those issues either. And so we have to it's a time for really purging this from if it's not something we want to be associated with. I think even his reputation at this point is something I would be willing to vote on, whether or not they're true or not. at this point, can we afford to be having leaders like this with this type of reputation and these type of allegations out there? I would posit no. But listeners have other views, and that's great too. And I'm so glad they're calling in and sharing their views as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beautiful things about what Point of View can do, is that it's an opportunity for us just to be able to have a civil, engaged conversation one with another, and we can disagree with one another because we recognize the truth that even our God has called us in Isaiah 1:18 to be able to come and reason together, to argue with one another. And we can do so and disagree with one another without demonizing them, and we just have different opinions. And so we would love to hear your opinion. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to Facebook and go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio and leave your comment or leave a question that we can get to or get back to if we don't have time on the air. We would love to hear from you. And when we come back, we're going to continue to take some of your phone calls because you all are calling. And we will be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the students' message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson. And we're entering into our last 9 minutes, and we've been talking about everything from Matt Lauer and the news that came out this morning that some sexual allegations have been leveled against him. Variety just now published an article that kind of shows their investigative work on kind of some of the mishaps that he has done and the kind of just some of the wrongdoing that's troubled him during his time. And we also learned earlier that Garrison Keillor, as well, of Minnesota Public Radio, is out. They have terminated him as well because of certain sexual misconduct and allegations. And now we've been talking about, for the latter part of the hour 45 of 2 hours, of what's happening in Alabama right now, where we have Alabama senatorial candidate for the Republican Party, Roy Moore, is facing more and more allegations. There's 8 currently individuals, women, that have come out against him and said that they have been wronged by him, and then have been substantiated by upwards of 30 other individuals that have come and kind of edified their accusations. And we have been really centering on this argument: is it morally justified to vote for Moore in the Alabama Senate race? As Christians, we recognize the truth that character and righteousness are significant when voting, based upon Proverbs 14. But we also recognize the truth that everyone's broken. We're all broken individuals, and we're just voting on somebody that's positions is a little bit more palatable and where we believe is the good and the true and the way, but also just recognizing that nobody is perfect. I think an important point before we jump on the phone lines is to recognize that there's been arguments that have been made about Kennedy being who he was and Jefferson being who he was, these individuals that have had character flaws in the past. Well, I think it's important for us to recognize that we look back on those individuals and see the character flaws. We're looking forward into a race right now where we're knowingly voting for these people with character flaws, or at least the accusation of character flaws. I think is really important for us to understand, especially when trying to make these comparisons. These are largely what happened with Jefferson as well as what happened with Kennedy were largely kept under wraps from voters.
That's true.
Before they unknowingly voted for them, whether for or against those particular things. But nevertheless, we're going to continue on the phone lines, and we're going to go over to Wyoming, and we've got Paula on the line. Paula, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Paula, what is your point of view?
Well, the first hour of the program, it really did sound like you guys had already convicted Mr. Moore. And as I listened more later on, I realized that wasn't your stand. But I agree with Jacob and Ty. Mr. Moore did come forward and say that he did not do that because he has a wife, daughters, and granddaughters, and would never do that. But also, I have to think about his stand when he was a judge and how he valiantly fought to keep the 10 Commandments. And I can't remember if it was at the courthouse or where it was exactly. But it's a sorry thing these days that we are guilty until proven innocent. And it's happening all over, and it has been for a long time. But anyway, I just want to tell you what it says here in Exodus 18:21 about selecting godly candidates. Select capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders. If the Lord gives you a peace about voting for a person that you believe would do a good job, then you know it's okay. If you don't have peace about it, it's not okay.
You are correct, Paula. I think that you bring up a really great point. It's kind of it can be comforting, but it can also be a little bit fearful to recognize that we will be judged at the end of the age, right? Because of Jesus, we have been washed clean. We're washed as white as snow, and we're loved far. What it says in Ephesians 3:17, it's that we've loved unfathomably by our God. But we'll also be taking account for what we utilize with our gifts and our talents as well. And so that'll be increasingly important as Alabama voters, as well as just us. Anytime we go into the polls or anything that we do, whatever we eat or drink, we recognize the truth that we have the opportunity to do for the glory of God. We'll continue taking some of your phone calls. We'll go over to Georgia. Georgia looks good. Georgia, Jacob in Georgia, are you there? Jacob, are you there? Jacob is not there. Jacob did not answer the phone call. So we'll continue moving forward. Let's go ahead and take Mike in North Carolina. Mike, are you there?
I am here, and I have to thank Jacob for hanging out.
Although maybe in the Jacob we heard from before, for all I know. Yeah, good man. Go ahead.
Anyway, yes, thank you for taking my call. When I think of Judge Moore, and just like the late previous caller mentioned, he's done some really great things, and he stood up for God, I believe. And but I think of myself. I'm in my 60s. When I was a young man, before I became a Christian, I did some things that I regret, you know. And, you know, I believe if those things are true about Judge Moore, and you know, you guys have discussed it, and I realize you haven't convicted him, but there's been some points brought out about, you know, if it was one or two, you know, maybe this is a political thing, but there's been a number of women. So if he did those things, and he came forward when they started out and said, you know, just like what I had mentioned about myself, you know, when I was a young man, I did some things that I regret, but God got a hold of me when I was, you know, 30 or, you know, 35 or whatever. And I'm a changed man now, and I think I have proven myself. You know, again, that the verse, you know, the truth will set you free. And right now, Judge Moore would be totally free of all of that controversy because he would have said, yes, some of those things are true, and I regret it, but that is not who I am today. You know, I think would have been much easier to vote for him. Not that I would ever vote for the other guy, but I just think that he would be free from all of this if he had taken that route. And now he's going to have to deal with God because he's lying about it. You know, and I'm certainly not any kind of judge myself. And believe me, God's going to judge me just like he judges them. And but I just think it would be much easier to vote for him if he had just come out right at the beginning and said, you know, that is not who I am today. You know, so please forgive me. You know, so on. Anyway, that's my comment.
Mike, thank you so much for your phone call. I think Kerby, he brings up a really great point. It's just in a free republic, we have the opportunity to ask questions, and the questions have not been satisfactorily answered, and therefore we're continuing to ask these questions and more.
Well, again, one of the things I've said in previous programs where we've talked about Judge Roy Moore is either he has been subject to one of the greatest scams ever put forth for a politician, and we owe him the biggest apology, or indeed some of these are true and we are going to have to live with the consequences, because this has mounted over time. When people say it's just been a few women, no, I mean, we are talking about a pretty significant corpus of information and allegations and evidence. But if nothing else, I'm glad I don't live in Alabama right now. I don't have to think about this. But for our listeners in Alabama, we commend you this article that you posted here today.
Yeah, so you can find that article and other information on the website at pointofview.net, or you can run over to the Facebook page at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We're coming to the close of the program. Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here today, guys.
What a great time. And Kerby, as always, thank you so much for your graciousness and just for your wise comments. We are just ever so grateful. And so we will be back tomorrow. And so be sure to tune in tomorrow. It'll be a great show. And this is, I'm so grateful for your time, and be sure to be able to check us out again on the website to be able to find some of those comments as well. My name is Nick Pitts, writer of the Daily Briefing. You can find that on thebriefing.net, or I'm over at Dallas Baptist University at www.dbu.edu. And we'll thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go